Chapter 5. Airship Bones. Laura. In the heart of a crashed airship that was now a gross-wing nest, the 6 members of the rescue party stood in a half-circle and stared down at the remains of the half-eaten sailor. The sight did not bode well for the civilians that had been snatched from the Taymore colony the previous night. Laura tilted her head. Faintly, she could detect an almost inaudible noise from deeper in the room. She took a step forward, listening. It was a strange hissing of air, almost like speech, but not quite. She hesitated. An image of a cluster of baby gross-wings, contentedly gnawing the bones of the villagers, pushed itself into her mind. Squeezing her eyes shut, she forced it from her thoughts and focused. The sound could also be the captured villagers, weakened from the trauma of being dragged from their homes. She carefully stepped over the lifeless body of the airship sailor in the doorway. She tried not to look, but her eyes latched onto his brutalized form all the same. A wave of dizziness washed over her. While she was distracted by the sight, her foot caught on something, causing her body to lurch forward. She reached down to unhook her foot and felt an odd, skin-like texture. Recoiling from the sensation, she looked at the floor to see part of a large, bat-like wing. They'd been eating each other. Revulsion coiled around Laura's stomach as she closed her eyes tightly and willed with all her might not to be sick. The noise came again, this time from right in front of her. Laura opened her eyes. A skinny adolescent girl was chained to a large horse tie ring on the wall opposite from her. Laura stumbled over straw as she rushed to reach the girl. "Hi, I'm Laura. We are here to help you. What is your name?" The girl looked at Laura wide-eyed but did not answer. Her lips were scabbed and chapped, and her eyes were badly sunken with dehydration. "Oh, you poor thing." Laura fumbled to retrieve her canteen. The girl gulped the water gratefully as Laura observed her in the dim light. She had delicate ears that tapered to sharp points and a thin but well-muscled build. She was clearly not human, but Laura didn't recognize her race. A set of heavy shackles bound the girl's wrists and were attached to the wall by a length of sturdy chain. The oversized restraints, which had clearly been designed for an adult, had left her skin raw and bleeding. It was painful to look at. "Braylon, can you break these off?" Laura asked, turning to the sergeant as he joined her in the small room. Sergeant Braylon came over and inspected the shackles. He moved the girl back and attempted to snap the chain with his bayonet. A field of purplish energy emerged around the metal, rebuffing his attack. Braylon's bayonet did not so much as leave a scratch on the restraints. He turned his efforts to the horse tie on the wall, beating it with the butt of his rifle. Finally, he kneeled down on the floor and put his ear up to the wall as he tapped it methodically. He straightened and addressed Thorne, who had joined them in the room. "It looks like this hook is welded into the scaffolding of the ship. I cannot break it without heavy equipment. Also, the shackles and chain are using some sort of dust magic. We would need someone who was trained in the magical arts to get them off. One more bit of technology the gross-wings should not be able to use." Thorne mused aloud. "The tie ring itself is also solid iron," Braylon commented in a flat tone. "Since we cannot break the tie ring or the shackles, I recommend that we cut her hands off." Laura watched the girl's horrified expression and immediately began to fumble with the shackles. "Braylon!" she choked. "Huh, how could you suggest such a thing? We can't cut her hands off. There must be some other way to get these loose." "I am sorry to say that Braylon might have a point." Thorne winced as he continued gently. "There is no way that we are going to get those shackles off here, and we don't have time to break down a solid iron bar. She might lose her hands, but at least she won't be eaten alive by gross-wings." Laura put herself between Braylon and the girl. She couldn't let this happen. Suddenly, she felt a wave of energy flicker through her body and out her fingers. She looked down to see the shackles clatter to the floor. "What happened?" Thorne leaned forward and nodded down at Laura's hands. They were covered in a thin field of crackling energy that soon fizzled and disappeared. Thorn raised an eyebrow at Laura. Usually, only mages can do that kind of thing. What are you not telling us? How did you do that? I don't know, Laura stammered. I just thought about the shackles unlocking and wished they would open. She rubbed the backs of her hands, feeling the hairs which were standing on end. Well, I'm glad we didn't have to cut the girl's hands off, Thorn said, still eyeing Laura suspiciously. The girl followed them out through the doorway, rubbing her wrists. They continued down the main corridor, checking each of the doors as they went. They entered a long room with cells on either side. It looked like the airship's brig. There, peering through the bars before them, were almost a dozen people from the colony. The colonists all stared at the rescuers wide-eyed, but were oddly quiet. Thorn took a step forward, then whirled around as a grosswing barreled into him. Its long, knife-like teeth sank deep into his right arm, blocking him from drawing his sword. Thorn snarled in pain and wrestled against the creature. Several of the soldiers rushed forward to help, stabbing at the grosswing with their bayonets. The beast lashed out at them with its claws. One man was thrown into the air from a particularly strong wing beat, the force sending him into his fellow soldier. The struggle was making far more noise than anyone would have liked. Laura was watching the soldiers dispatch the grosswings from a distance when suddenly the ship got much darker. It was as if someone had turned the light off. One of the privates held up the tattered remains of a star oil lantern frame. Shit! Her heart pounded. The ghost of an airship turned grosswing nest was far more terrifying when plunged into darkness without even the smallest of protection shields. Thorn held up a red sphere that gave off a faint glow of light. He tore a key ring from the grosswing's body and threw it to Laura. Here! Unlock the cells! She caught it and immediately went to work trying the keys in the cell doors. She bit her lip. There must have been 100 keys on the stupid key ring. Thankfully, all the prisoners were in the same 2 cells, so she only had to find 2 keys out of the 100. Finally, she managed to get the doors open, and the prisoners poured out of the cells. The tattered villagers included several children and one man who was limping on an injured foot. They were all in rough shape. Laura noticed one of the children lingering behind the rest of the group. He was reaching down and tugging on a small, hunched form on the cell floor. Laura stepped forward to get a better look. Sitting huddled on the floor was a catkin boy, clutching a piece of crumpled parchment paper in both hands. Timmy! Laura swept the cat boy up into her arms, feeling relief pour through her. Timmy buried his head into her shoulder. We have to get out of here now, Thorn warned. The others might have heard us killing the grosswing sentry. Laura handed Timmy to the girl they had rescued from the horse stall. No sooner had they started toward the brig door than it was flung open, and a flood of grosswings poured in directly in front of them. They all turned and dashed in the opposite direction through the brig. Laura's heart pounded as she pumped her legs, trying desperately to stay ahead of the grosswings. The ship's brig seemed to stretch forever as they passed empty cell after empty cell. Finally, they reached a doorway that led into another corridor. The grosswings followed close behind. Laura searched for something they could use to their advantage as the passage before them widened. The corridor was broken up into segments that could be sectioned off by giant bulkhead doors. She dared a peek over her shoulder. If only they could find a way to drop one of those doors. It would give them a chance to escape. To her right, one of the children stumbled over the uneven footing and almost fell on his face. Laura grabbed the child by the arm and dragged him forward as other villagers barely avoided falling on top of the boy. A loud rattling sound echoed in Laura's ears, and she looked up in time to see one of the bulkhead doors fall shut, right in front of them. Somehow, the grosswings had figured out how to close the bulkheads. The dozen members of their group whirled to face the monsters that were closing in on them. Captain Thorn and 2 of the privates positioned themselves between the civilians and the beasts, while Braylon and the other soldier struggled to open the bulkhead. Screams erupted from the colonists in the back of the group as the grosswings tore at them. The 2 men strained with all their might against the bulkhead door. but it would not budge. Laura felt a dizzying sense of panic as she watched their hopeless efforts. Behind her, one of the privates let out a terrified scream as a grosswing burst forward and sank its teeth into his leg. Captain Thorne lunged forward to drive the creature away, but now they were both being overwhelmed by the sheer number of beasts. Braylon turned from the bulkhead, his face dark. He drew his sword in one hand and held a rifle in the other. With the silence of a ghost, he rushed to the opposite side of the screaming civilians and began slashing at the endless mass of grosswings. Laura felt strangely disconnected from reality as she watched the stream of monsters steadily pour toward them. It was like watching the ocean, some force of the gods that could not be resisted. The realization slowly dawned on her that this was how she was going to die. She turned as the girl they had rescued from the horse stall tugged on her sleeve. Without explanation, the girl handed Timmy to Laura, then walked away from the grosswings toward the end of the tunnel. Suddenly, the girl let out an inhuman cry and rushed toward the bulkhead. There was a loud, grinding sound of metal rubbing against metal as the girl braced herself and wrenched the door upward. Laura felt the floor vibrating under her feet as the girl somehow lifted the bulkhead door over her head and held it there, arms trembling with effort. The whole world seemed to blink as the prisoners took in what had happened. A moment later, they all dashed madly through the bulkhead. Thorne and his men glanced back over their shoulders in confusion. It took them a moment to register the need to switch gears from dying heroically to having a chance to escape. Then, they too dashed toward the exit, with the grosswings filling the passageway behind them. Sergeant Braylon extracted the girl from the bulkhead doorway behind them while simultaneously kicking grosswings under the bulkhead door as it slammed shut. "Keep going," Thorne panted. "Don't give them a chance to trap us again." They pounded down the corridor. The beasts tried to stop them with another bulkhead, but this time the winged monster's timing was off. The bulkhead slammed shut right behind Braylon, nearly crushing him under its weight. They were beginning to see daylight at the end of the corridor. They had almost made it. The colonists flew to the end of the corridor and recoiled to avoid plunging 20 feet down, straight into a swarm of grosswings that milled in the air outside. The whole nest was in an uproar. The outside of the airship and surrounding beach appeared to move as the awakened grosswings scuffled and flapped into the air. It was as if they were standing above a giant anthill or bee's nest. The soldiers leveled shots at the fluttering masses to keep them from landing inside. Meanwhile, Laura took the opportunity to assess their surroundings. They appeared to be in the lowermost cargo hold of the ship. A set of enormous doors that were cocked partially open were all that separated them from the grosswings swarming outside. Her eyes fell on a square control panel covered with variously colored dials and levers. "Captain Thorne." She waved him over and indicated the panel. "Do you know how to use these?" Thorne shrugged and tried pushing a button. Nothing happened. He grumbled and tried wrenching a lever with both hands. "They could be secured with a magic lock to prevent tampering." Braylon looked at the panel over Thorne's shoulder. "I think you just need to exert more adustum when you use them." Laura reached over and poked one of the buttons. Suddenly, there was the loud whoosh of a bulkhead door opening from the direction they had come, followed by the scrambling of clawed feet. "I'm sorry! I'm sorry!" Laura began frantically pushing buttons to try to fix her mistake. There was a cacophony of loud noises throughout the belly of the ship as bulkheads slammed open and shut. "Help!" Laura grabbed a large lever and yanked it up. The entire airship vibrated beneath them as the cargo hold doors ground open. Unsecured barrels and crates tumbled out all over the ground. "Shit! Shit! Shit!" Laura continued to flip switches and buttons. A long metal arm covered with cages shot out from the cargo hold. It swung wildly back and forth from the airship's odd angle. The cargo hold doors began rapidly opening and closing, breaking off bits of animal cages and sending them flying. The grosswings on the beach scrambled wildly, doubtless fearing they would be eaten by this ship that had suddenly come to life. "Come on!" Thorne grabbed Laura's arm to pull her toward the rest of the party as they climbed out the temporarily clear doorway. The ship was now rather unstable from the jostling of the cargo hold doors. A chunk of siding came off in Laura's hands, causing her to flop onto her stomach. Grosswings swarmed toward her, snapping at her arm and tearing off one sleeve. Captain Thorne dragged her to her feet. The group was dwarfed by the hordes of beasts, who were starting to regain their composure. One of the colonists, who was struggling to keep up on an injured foot, tripped and was instantly dragged into the midst of the Grosswings. Within seconds, his body was covered with the creatures as they tore and shredded him to pieces with their teeth. The remainder of the colonists banded together more tightly as they pushed their way toward the edge of the beach. The Grosswings simultaneously dive-bombed them and attacked from the ground, snapping, slashing, and trying to make them trip. Laura ripped her foot away from a Grosswing that had latched onto her shoe. The force almost made her fall over. There was a loud squawking sound from the direction of the ship. Laura looked over her shoulder. A large, dark shape shot up from the edge of the terra beyond the airship. Its wings beat loudly in the air. From this distance, she couldn't quite make it out. Was it some kind of bird? Perhaps a bat? Or a very large Grosswing? The Grosswings around the airship began to let out a chorus of shrill screams. Seconds later, a winged dragon swooped down from the sky and dove toward them. The sight of the creature instilled Laura with some long-buried primal terror. She was instantly frozen to the spot where she stood gazing up into the sky. The beast's wings spanned at least 30 feet, and its skinny body almost seemed to slither through the air. Long teeth, the size of railroad spikes, protruded from the dragon's long snout. She watched as more of the enormous creatures emerged from under the edge of the terra. The dragons gracefully sailed high in the air as if they were performing an aerial ballet. Suddenly, one of them folded its wings and rocketed toward the ground. It pinned an unfortunate Grosswing in its jaws and dragged the squawking creature into the void outside the edge of the terra. With one flick of its giant head, the dragon ripped the Grosswing in two pieces. A scream escaped her lips as one of the dragons dove to the ground only feet away from her. She could feel the air from its wing beats hitting her face as the beast snapped at the scattering Grosswings. The dragon's jaws nearly captured one, but the Grosswing squirmed away at the last second. The beast's head snaked toward Laura, twisting rapidly from side to side. She flailed as she was knocked backward to the ground by the force of the Grosswings trying to flee. Laura clawed the sandy ground with her hands, trying frantically to gain traction. She could feel hot breath on her face as her fingers grabbed something solid. "Take this!" She hurled a squirming young Grosswing at the dragon's mouth. The creature's jaws snapped shut in surprise. She didn't wait to see what happened next as she scrambled to her feet and dashed toward the tree line. The beach was pure chaos as Grosswings scattered to escape the dragon's attacks. Laura followed the colonists as they dove into the trees. On her way, she kicked at a Grosswing that had scuttled in after them. "How much further is it to the truck?" Laura scooped up a villager child who was lagging behind. It was a wonder any of them had made it out of there alive. Eventually, they slowed to a hurried walk as they put more distance between themselves and the airship. Laura turned and made a mental inventory of the colonists they had rescued. There were 4 human adults, 3 human children, and 1 little catkin boy. She looked at the adolescent girl they had found in the ship's stables. Now, in open daylight, she noted the olive complexion of the girl's skin. The teenager's clothes were ragged and filthy, and she was covered with cuts and bruises. The white of an old scar peeked out from beneath the collar on the side of her neck. It must have been quite the accident to cause such a large scar. Laura joined in step beside the girl, shifting the weight of the younger child on her hip. "Hello there. I'm Laura. What is your name?" she asked. The girl stared up at her with big, haunted eyes. "It's okay." She tried to reassure the girl with a smile. "You are safe now. The monsters are all gone." The girl looked down at her feet. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Tyra." Her voice was almost inaudible. "Ah, very good. It is nice to meet you, Tyra." Laura quickly organized her thoughts. Does your family live in the colony? The girl turned her face away and shook her head. Laura swallowed. She must have been on the ship when it crashed. How horrible. The poor girl must be a mess. They walked in silence until they reached the truck. Mayfield and Dolan were perched on the cab, looking up at the sky through a pair of binoculars. Laura turned and looked back toward the beach. She could still see tiny shapes circling in the sky. Captain! Private Dolan jumped down to greet them. You won't believe what we saw in the sky while you were gone. His words ended abruptly as he saw the villagers and rushed to help. Thorne sighed with exhaustion. Private, we need the first aid kit, and we need to get out of here. He leaned against the truck bed. I'll drive.
Thank you for listening to A Taymore Deception. Tune in every Wednesday for new chapters.